right, so if you can cool here with Neil Ratner. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good today. Like I said, the sun's shining for a change, so I got to be better.
Yeah, right. You know, I was actually going over your new book there, the Roc Doc, and it comes off like a screenplay for some crazy TV show.
I'm ready. You know anybody? We've talked about it, and I've actually been approached by a couple of production companies for a documentary, but nobody's come up with the right treatment yet. But I fully believe that will happen at some point.
Now, for those that aren't familiar, let's start off at the beginning here. Now, you always wanted to be a drummer, is that right?
Yes, I did. You know, like many people in my generation, I grew up in the, late 50s and the 60s. And as I say in the book, I had rhythms running around my brain. And I needed to get them out any way I could, much to the dismay of my parents, banging silverware on the table and stuff like that. But, growing up in that time and being a musician, we all wanted to be rock stars.
And you actually had a rock star for a neighbor, is that right?
A rock star for a neighbor, I did. That was like my entry into the wrong side of the music business. The business end. What happened was, so I played the drums as a kid and, hoped to get the record deal and become the big rock star, which of course never happened. My other dream, though, was to become a doctor, so I went to college. And between my sophomore and junior year, I had an opportunity to get a license as an operating room technician in a 2-month training program in a hospital. So I took a sublet in New York City, and it was the summer of 1969. And you can imagine, the sublet was in the East Village of New York, 13th Street between 1st and 2nd Avenue. You can imagine what that was like in the summer of 69 with the Fillmore down the block, and Electric Circus, and hippies everywhere. And I move into this apartment. I start to hear live music coming from my upstairs neighbors. Being a musician, I have to go investigate. I knock on the door. Guy opens the door. He's got a guitar slung over his shoulder. Little kind of guy, and he invites me in. I don't immediately recognize him. And then he starts talking, and he says, "My name's Rick Derringer." Well, being a music guy, I said, "Rick Derringer, the McCoys?" He said, "Yeah." And so Rick, his brother Randy, and Randy Hobbs, who were all members of the McCoys, were living upstairs. And the reason they were in New York is they had just signed on to become Johnny Winter's band. And so, yeah, Rick and I got real friendly that summer, and about a year later, he called me up. I was thinking that he was going to ask me to be a drummer, but he offered me the gig as Edgar Winter's road manager.
And that puts you into the different side of the business that you planned on being in.
For sure.
When you started to be a manager there, what were the duties? What were the things like back then?
Well, I had no idea even what a road manager was. And Rick explained to me, don't worry about it, we'll train you. And Johnny had this road manager named Teddy Slatus, who was like one of the best. And so I went out with Teddy and Johnny. And, I learned that I had to make the hotel arrangements. I had to make the transportation arrangements. I had to make sure that the gig was ready for us. There was a stage and a sound system. I had to get the band to the gig, get the band back, and then do it all the next day. So, all the different things that I guess a manager would do, but you do it on the road instead of sitting in your office somewhere.
Well, I mean, you must have did something right. I mean, it led on to Humble Pie, ELP. You did Jay Giles. Was Jay Giles actually even in the band when you were doing Jay Giles?
Yeah, he was in the band. I mean, they were a cool band, man. I got to them because after I did Edgar, I left Edgar after about a year, and we parted ways amicably. I was just ready for something else. And a lawyer friend of mine told me there was this manager named D. Anthony, who was really a rock impresario back in those days. And D managed Jay Giles and Humble Pie and Peter Frampton and Emerson Lake and Palmer, and he was looking for a special assistant. And so I took that job, and I got to go out with Jay and the boys. And actually, then when I went on to be tour manager for Emerson Lake and Palmer, we took Jay Giles on their first European tour.
Oh, really?
He was a gas man, taking them to London and around Europe, and and they were so nervous because they were such an American band. They weren't sure how they would go over overseas, and of course, people just loved them because their live performance was really what it was all about. That was a party band.
I have to laugh. I was covering Jay Giles when they opened up for Bob Seger on the last tour, and a reporter for the local newspaper was taking photos, and they were like, "Which one of these guys is Jay Giles?"
Yeah, but you laughed. It was the same back then. Nobody knew who Jay Giles was, because Jay was kind of a quiet guy. And, of course, Peter Wolf was the front guy, and he was not a quiet guy. So I think people probably got confused.
For sure. Now, ELP actually got you to move to London, is that right?
Yeah, they did. What happened was they were being handled by D. Anthony in America. And so I would go out with all of these groups as his special assistant. He wanted me on the tours. And one of my duties actually was to collect the money. Back in the day, groups got paid in cash at the gig because nobody trusted anybody. And there were all these ridiculously complicated deals after so many people, and after so many people, the percentages kicked in. But I went out with all of the groups, and then I went out with Emerson Lake and Palmer. And unbeknownst to me, they were getting ready to change management. And in the middle of the tour, Greg Lake said to me, I want you to meet somebody. And it was in Miami, and there's this guy sitting there, and we start to talk, and his name is Stuart Young, and he's an accountant, and he's going to be their new manager, and he says, I know what I really need is a great tour manager, and you're it, come to London. And, I wasn't sure I wanted to leave D, but I was young, and the idea of living in Europe with a group that I knew was going to be one of the biggest groups in the world was just too much to pass up. So, I moved to London.
And that got you to start Circus Talents?
Yes, that did. What happened was I spent some time with the ELP, and I went on the road, and I got to meet a lot of different people in London, and one of those people helped me make my next career move. I had noticed that all these big groups were using multiple different companies when they went on tour. So there was a sound company, a lighting company, a trucking company. It all got very complex, particularly in a day before cell phones and computers. And I had met this English rock star named Johnny Halliday, and he traveled like a circus. I mean, he was like the Elvis Presley of France. He could do this. He would take a circus tent, and he had all his own equipment, all his own crew, and he'd just set up the tent somewhere in a field and throw up a couple of posters and sell out as many nights as he wanted, pick up, go to the next place. And so I came up with this idea, like a circus, why can't I have an all-in-one production company? And when I got to London, I got a surprise phone call, and it was from an old girlfriend of mine from the University of Vermont way back in college days. And she had married a guy named Peter Watts, who was the chief sound technician for the Pink Floyd. And Peter and I became really friendly. And when I told him about my idea for this company, he said, well, I got the perfect partner for you. There's this hot English sound and lighting company. These guys are splitting. One guy's keeping all the equipment. Let me introduce them to you. You guys should be partners because they're the most up on technology. They have the first digital light board. And so I met a guy named Jim Morris, and we became partners, created a company called Circus Talents Limited, and went out and started to do all-in-one tours for groups.
And that you did it with Dark Side of the Moon with Pink Floyd, right?
Yeah, which was totally unexpected because up until that point, the Floyd had always been self-contained. But something was going on, and I knew it because Peter started to bitch. Before the Dark Side of the Moon album was even completed, they were going out on a short English tour to try and do the album as a concept piece live, and it was not going well. He didn't have enough equipment. He couldn't do the production he wanted. He and Arthur Max, the lighting designer, were very, very unhappy, to the extent where Peter came up with the idea, let's take Neil's company with us. And he went and talked to Steve O'Rourke, the manager of the Floyd, who was all for it. And so actually, as the album was released in March of 1973, my company joined the American leg of the Dark Side of the Moon tour and continued on. And Peter and I were so successful with that combined equipment that since the Floyd weren't going out again for a while, Steve let us use that combined lot of equipment to then bid on other tours. And we went and did T-Rex and Three Dog Night and a couple of other things.
Now, what was it like touring with Pink Floyd, man? It had to have been some crazy times.
It was real crazy times because, you know, they were probably the most technologically advanced group of their time. And having said that, we were using things that had never been used before, like lasers and flash pots and airplanes on guy wires. And so, you know, every night we held our breath that nothing crazy would happen. Unfortunately, nothing did. But, you know, from a logistics point of view and production and equipment and people, it was really a massive undertaking. But, you know, sitting there and seeing the production every night, you knew that you were watching something special. Having said that, when you're working a tour, it's not the same as, you know, laying on your couch smoking a joint and listening to the albums through headphones.
For sure.
You know, and who knew then what it would be looked back upon as today? You know what I mean? You're doing it, you know it's great, but you don't know that it's going to stay on the charts for 100 and some odd weeks and be one of the most, you know, iconic albums ever.
So you truly and almost invented theatrics for a concert then.
You know, I'm going to sort of take credit for that in a strange kind of way. And it happened really with Emerson Lake and Palmer. It's one of the concepts of the company was we'll be all in one to the extent where create your production and I will make that happen for you. For whatever kind of production you want, you know, I'll pay for the production as long as you rent it back from me for a long enough period of time that I could make money. You'll have the equipment almost as if it was your own, you know, almost like a lend-lease kind of thing. And so the first group that I really went back to with the concept, I mean, we did a couple of small things with Bee Gees and Genesis, but then I went to Emerson Lake and Palmer, and they were a concept-oriented group as well. And Greg Lake, you know, he sat down and he said, I'll tell you what we want. He said, you know, we go to these huge venues every night, and they're so impersonal, and they're all different. And why couldn't we have our own theater and take that theater and carry it with us and set it up wherever we go, and we could be comfortable, and we'll have curtains, and we'll enclose everything within the theater. And nobody had really done that at that time. And I ventured with them to accomplish that, and it was massive. It was 60 foot by 30 foot by 30 foot high, and it was all done on pulleys. We didn't even have hydraulics back then. And it took hours and hours to set up and take down. The road crew were dropping like flies when we first actually tried to tour it. But to my knowledge, it was the first time anybody had tried to create a theater within a venue.
Now, you just mentioned you did a theater, you did the airplanes with Pink Floyd. Was there anything that a band asked you to do that you just said, this is impossible?
Not that I could think of. We tried to make everything a reality. Sometimes it didn't go off so well, not as we planned, but I don't think there's anything we ever said, no, we can't do this, it's too ridiculous.
Now, you mentioned a couple of the other acts that you work with, T-Rex. I know you did some stuff with AC/DC. What was the band that you liked working with the most?
You know, I'm going to have to go back to the beginning, to Edgar Winter's White Trash, because it was so new, and it was so raw, and the music of that band, you know, they were a horn band, And the band was composed of Edgar and friends of his that he had for years, musician friends of his. Edgar was from Beaumont, Texas, which is in the eastern part of Texas, close to the Louisiana border. And so everybody in the band was from Texas and Louisiana, and they played together a long time. And Edgar also invited his old friend, who was a legend in the South, another singer named Jerry LaCroix, who was a real legendary guy in the South. And the two of them really formed the band together. And for my own musical taste, and just from the rawness of it, and being with a group from the beginning as they really became famous, that was the experience that I would relate to, on that level.
Now, things are going good for you. You're doing all these tours. You're working with all these bands. Then you get laid up with kidney stones. You end up in the hospital.
Correct. It was actually my second bout of kidney stones that was, they were both significant. The first bout is something I'll always be sorry about, in that I had gotten a call from Peter. The Floyd were finishing the Dark Side of the Moon album. And Roger Waters had this crazy idea. He had made up these flashcards. And he was just inviting all kinds of people into the studio. And the flashcards had questions on them, and people had to answer the questions. And Roger was going to somehow put it at the end of the album, incorporate it. Nobody knew quite what his plan was. And I was invited to the studio, that maybe I could answer some questions. Who knew what was going to happen? And that was my first bout of kidney stones. And Peter, of course, and Hoodie, who was my old girlfriend, his wife, are both well represented on those voices on the Dark Side of the Moon. Peter's the hysterical laughing, and Putty says cruising for a bruising. And, so that was one of my big regrets. The second episode of Kidney Stones was after we had completed, I think, Three Dog Nights T-Rex. And it was late at night, and I was watching an American movie about medical residents going through their residency and becoming country doctors. And I had this epiphany. I had had this dream of being a doctor, and I had accomplished everything that I had set out to in the business end of the business, and I wasn't going to be a drummer. So I decided to make the switch.
And that's when you became an anesthesiologist?
Well, first I had to go back to college. I was at nothing at that point. Because back in the day, to take the job, when Rick offered me the job of road manager, I just walked out of University of Vermont. So I was basically had very few credits, had to reapply to college, 2 years of college, couldn't get into an American medical school because, as I'm sure you're aware, getting into medical school was hard then, hard now, probably always will be, not enough spots. But there were foreign schools that were catering to the overflow of Americans. I picked Guadalajara, Mexico, spent the next 4 years going to medical school in Mexico in Spanish. Then there was a real pathway to get back into the American system for American-born foreign students. Had to do a year of unpaid internship. Thought I wanted to be a surgeon, did 2 years of surgical residency, then switched into an anesthesia residency, which was another couple of years, and then I could finally practice as an anesthesiologist.
And you actually went in and you started working with plastic surgeons, is that correct?
Absolutely. When I was finishing my residency, unlike my fellow anesthesia residents, I did not want to stay in a hospital and be part of an anesthesia group and be on call every third night, do all kinds of surgery. I had pretty much had it with that kind of life. And so I looked around to see if there was anything else I could do as an anesthesiologist, and I realized that doctors in New York, particularly, were operating in their office, but on a very limited scale, because the anesthesiologists really didn't want to make a career of that. And the reason they didn't is because the drugs and the monitors were really geared towards hospital-based surgeries, not office-based surgery. But with the experience that I had, I felt differently. And so I took the lead and was one of the creators of office-based anesthesia in New York City. I started my practice with cosmetic surgeons because I knew they did the kind of procedures that could be done in the office and they had the kind of profile with patients who really didn't want to be in the hospital anyway, and the surgeons would be more than happy to operate in their office if they felt they had a qualified anesthesiologist and a safe place to do it.
So what you're telling me is you went ahead and you basically revolutionized touring, management, and production, and then you go ahead, you go become a doctor, and you do the same thing there. You revolutionize that field as well.
I don't know if I revolutionized it, but yeah, I was innovative in both industries, no question about it. I guess that's my MO.
So you're doing you're working, and you get a lot of high profile clients that come through.
Yeah, plastic surgery in New York City. You can imagine who walked through the office. You know, anybody and everybody could come through the office.
And one day, Michael Jackson comes through the office.
He sure does. And it wasn't that big a surprise, believe it or not. And the reason it wasn't that big a surprise is going back to when I decide that I'm gonna be the one to start this thing. I didn't know who to go to. What surgeon do I pick? So I'm in the doctor's lounge. It's about 2 months before the end of my residency. I'm freaking out because I don't even have a job. Everybody else has got jobs. They're going into more education. I got nothing after all these years. And I read in one of the gossip columns in one of the New York papers that Michael Jackson had just come to see his favorite New York plastic surgeon. I look at the guy's name and I realize, oh, I know that guy. He's in this hospital. That's the guy that I should approach. Not because Michael goes to him, but because he's probably got the profile that I'm looking for.
Right.
And so that's the guy that I did approach. And 8 years later, Michael walked in the office.
And you guys actually expanded on that relationship, is that correct?
Yeah, what happened was, he was just a patient, a special patient, but a patient like any other patient. But we sort of hit it off real quickly. I was not like any other doctor he had ever met. He knew that immediately. I had a ponytail and an earring.
Right.
Back in 1994, not that many doctors had ponytails and earrings. And then when he asked me why, and I told him my story, it was like, wow, what kind of doctor are you?
Right.
And Michael's MO, which I didn't know until it happened to me, was if he liked you, he would ask you for your phone number. Now, he had my phone number because when the surgeon told me he was coming to the office, he had given Michael my number. A lot of celebrities would prefer to call you rather than you call them for the pre-op stuff.
Right.
And so Michael had my number. We had a good experience on the phone. We had a good experience the next day when I did this little procedure. I don't know if it was a week or two later, at about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, the phone rings. I pick up the phone, and it's Michael. Hey, how you doing? How am I doing? It's 3:30 in the morning.
Right.
But I later found out that was Michael's MO. As we all know, he didn't sleep. And he loved to call people at ridiculous times of the night, and that's how he would develop friendships. Actually, there's a famous chapter in the book called The Princess and the King about how he developed a relationship with Princess Di exactly the same way. Only met her once. But they became super close with these late-night crazy phone calls.
Now, you mentioned that he couldn't sleep, and you started helping him. Is that correct?
Absolutely, I did. What happened was I had met him that one day in '94, and then we became friendly with these late-night phone calls. And then in '95, in the fall, he started to spend a lot of time in New York because he was slated to do 2 concerts at the Beacon Theater in New York City, which was going to be filmed by HBO. And it was a big deal. And he was very nervous, and he was not dealing with it well at all. He was not drinking fluids. He was horribly dehydrated. His nutrition was poor. And, of course, he had this chronic sleep problem. And I could tell things were not good, but, what can I do? We talked about it here and there. And then on Thanksgiving Day, about 2 weeks before the show, he called me up crying hysterically, please help me, speak to my doctors, I can't do this. And I felt bad. By then he was my friend. And, when a friend reaches out in need, you try and come up with a solution to help them if you can. And I felt I was in somewhat of a unique position to possibly create something to help him. And I spoke to some of his other doctors about an idea I had for a treatment which would give him the fluids and electrolytes he needed and the nutritional supplements and a little bit of sleep, or presumed sleep, let's say. And they agreed, and so I created this treatment to try and help him get through these concerts. Unfortunately, it was too little too late. We did the treatment a couple of times, slated for a third time, and he collapsed on the stage of the Beacon Theater, and that ended up in a hospitalization. And he got better, and we continued our friendship. And then a couple of years later, I got a call to help him out again on the history tour.
Now, how does that work? I mean, when you're helping him out like that, you got to be with him every night, or?
Well, okay. It was, first of all, it was a very out-of-the-box, unique kind of one-of-a-kind treatment, which was effective in my hands when it was controlled by me, and that's the only way that I was willing to participate. During the treatment period, yes, as an anesthesiologist, you must observe your patient at all times. You never know when bad things are going to happen. And so if you're giving any kind of a treatment, you must be there 100% of the time with the patient fully monitored and you being fully aware of what's going on.
So how long did that last with the two of you? Like, I mean, you're there so you got to watch them all night long. I mean, how long did you do this for?
So over the course of the 8 years that Micheal and I had a relationship, I did this treatment for him maybe 25 to 30 times.
Okay.
And it was 100% determined by me, not Micheal. So, for example, I told you about the 2 times when we started it at the beginning for the HBO taping of the Beacon shows. I didn't see him or we didn't even talk about anything like this until the history tour. I was going to go on a lot of the history tour. It didn't work out that way. I went on the end of the history tour, the African leg. And basically, I was only willing to do this treatment either right before or right after a concert, not on consecutive days. It had to be separated by a number of days, and it had to be the right circumstances for me, so that I felt comfortable and knew that I could keep him safe. So this wasn't an everyday thing. This wasn't an every week thing. It was, as needed, determined by me when he had a concert or some ridiculous pressured event that he wasn't going to do because he couldn't sleep and he wouldn't eat and he wouldn't drink properly, and so we would determine that maybe a treatment would be necessary. But again, in 8 years, 25 to 30 times, a lot different than what happens at the end.
See, like, in my mind, like, all I read is from, the tabloids and everything like that. I thought it was like an every night thing, like you hook them up and boom.
Well, at the end, that is the way it is from what I read as well. And I never would have sanctioned that. I never would have sanctioned it. I never would have done it. I never would have condoned it. I told Micheal no if I wasn't comfortable and I didn't feel it was appropriate. So again, under my control, it was done in a vastly different way. And I think the results bear out what I'm saying. In the 8 years that I was with him, he never missed a concert or an important event. I got him off a lot of the sleep meds that he was on. And nothing untoward ever happened. Contrast that with the end of the story, and you'll see a vastly different story.
Yeah, I mean, it's truly unfortunate. I mean, you were there to help him, and then somebody jumps in, and what happened,
Yeah, I mean, you can't just jump into things like this and think you understand and that you can do it if you're not a trained professional. You must be an anesthesiologist to do what I was doing and what that other fella tried to do. And he wasn't. He was not an anesthesiologist.
Now, Micheal actually introduced you to Nelson Mandela, is that correct?
Yes, he did. One of the highlights of my life, I might add. And actually, I'll tell you the story. What happened was, when I knew I was going to South Africa, Mandela was still the president, or he had just become the president. And he was one of my heroes to begin with, and I told Michael, I really, just shake his hand, get a picture, something. And so on that history tour, Mandela did show up the first night in the dressing room, and it's a great story in the book, and I got to shake his hand. And then later on, many years later, we did a couple of charity concerts, one in Seoul, Korea, and one in Munich, Germany. And a lot of why Michael did the concerts was from his relationship with Mandela, and Mandela pushed him to do something. And so half the money was going to the Nelson Mandela's Children's Fund, and as a 50th birthday present, Michael took me back to South Africa to give Mandela the check, and on that occasion, I actually got to spend an afternoon with him and his wife and Michael and the kids, and an incredible thing. And then many years later, I started a charity. Mandela heard about it, and he created the opportunity for us to raise enough money to actually start our first project, which was a micro bakery in a township in South Africa.
Oh, man, that's awesome. Good for you.
Yeah. I mean, the whole Mandela story was great, the whole thing. And, it's very interesting. I'm sure many people don't really know about Michael's relationship with Mandela, and I spend a lot of time in the book explaining that, and it was really quite a remarkable thing to see, almost like a father-son kind of thing. It was great. It was great.
No, I mean, you must have seen some crazy things. I mean, you see, all you see, like, from my end, I'm seeing tabloid, I'm seeing, stories I heard. You hear Corey Feldman, Macaulay Culkin coming over. This guy's got an amusement park in his backyard. I mean, he's got Bubbles, the monkey.
All true.
All
true. I got to meet Macaulay on one or two occasions. Nice guy, liked him. But yeah, all kinds of crazy things. And Neverland was a trip unto itself, That was quite a place.
What was one of the wildest experiences you had working with Michael? Besides, I mean, obviously there's fantastic like Mandela there, but I'm saying something outrageous like, oh my God, this is surreal here.
Okay. So, I tell this story in the book, this chapter in the book. Michael was staying at the Waldorf Towers in New York City, which is not the Waldorf Hotel. It's a more specialized part of the Waldorf Hotel. It's all suites, and it's celebrities and kings and queens and whatever. And so he invited my wife and I up for dinner one night. And so we go up and we have this great dinner. And we're getting ready to leave. And he says, no, don't go yet. Okay, we won't go yet. And he goes into the bedroom. I'm not going to follow him into the bedroom. It's a private bedroom. But he calls us into the bed. Come here. Leanne, come here. Okay, so go in the bedroom. And there's a safe in the bedroom, right? And he's fiddling with the safe. Okay. And he pulls out a briefcase, a black attaché case. And he throws it on the bed, and he opens it up, and it's filled with jewels.
Wow.
I mean, just the most intense diamond and sapphire and the most intense jewelry you could ever imagine.
Right.
So I'm freaked out. It's like, oh, my God. And he starts handling the jewelry, and he takes this outrageous diamond and emerald necklace, and he goes to put it around my wife, put it on her. And she goes, no. And she looks at me, and he says, oh, rat, come on. And he puts it on her. Then he takes another outrageous piece, puts it on his neck, and he tries to give me a piece, right?
Right.
He says, no, that's okay. And he's admiring it, the two of them. He says, you know what? He says, this hotel has a presidential suite. I've never seen it. And they told me I could see it anytime I want. Let's see it now. I said, now? What are you talking about? He said, yeah, I'm going to call the night manager. He'll come up. So sure enough, he calls up the guy, right? And the guy shows up, and I'm telling you, man, you had to see this guy's face. So there's Michael standing with my wife. She's a pretty blonde, and they've got this intense jewelry on. And the guy opens the door. And he's like blown away. He doesn't know what to say. And I don't want to start his hysterical laughing, but it was that kind of a thing where hysterical laughing, and sure enough,
Right.
we go waltzing up to the presidential suite of the Waldorf Towers, which was quite a trip, because every president that stayed there had left something or had a gift sent over. And so there was a chair from Reagan and a thing from Kennedy, and it was really amazing. But just watching this guy's face as these two, my wife and Micheal, are parading around with this really outrageously expensive jewelry on that was a trip. That was an experience.
Oh, that sounds amazing for sure. Now, as I said, I mean, this comes off, your book, your life, comes off like a screenplay. Now, there is, in any good screenplay, some dark turns, and there's some dark turns that come for you.
Yep.
You battled with addiction, you ended up going to prison for a little bit.
Yep.
And then you go ahead and you bounce yourself back, and here you are now.
That's right. Well, but I think that's the message, you know. I think there's an important message there. You know, what I learned in my life is it's not the good times that stimulate growth. It's the hard times that stimulate growth, and you have to be aware of that. And you've got to take each of those circumstances and make them into something positive. You know, in Buddhism, there's something called change poison to medicine. And so that's what you have to do. You know, you have to not let yourself be defeated. I mean, I easily could have been defeated after I was a drug addict or after I went to prison, but every time I dusted myself off and I stood up and I said, you know what, it's okay. I've learned some lessons and now I could go forward in a better way.
Now, you wrote the book, you got it published. What are you doing now?
Well, you know, my intention had always been to make it more than a book, because as I just said, there's a lot of great life lessons that I've learned, and I want to share them with people. And I have messages that I want people to understand, you know. One of the important things in life is to give back to those less fortunate than yourself. And that's a lesson I've learned in life. You know, when you talk about the turnaround, you know, I started to do charity work in the 90s. And then I really spent a lot of time doing charity work, you know, after all this happened, and I moved up to Woodstock. And one of the things I've learned in life is that you can't keep it if you don't give it away. And that anybody who has any kind of good fortune really behooves you to share it with somebody else and see how good it'll make you feel. With all the things that I've done and all the people that I've met, some of the best times have been giving back to those less fortunate, creating these charity projects. So that's something that I intend to devote myself to. I'd like to go out and be a speaker of some sort, tell these stories and the lessons learned. And I've gotten involved in radio a little bit. I guess I started my journey back at the University of Vermont as a radio DJ. And when I started this project, I put together some people to help me with it because I wanted it to be more than just a book. And one of the things that they gravitated to was the old rock and roll experiences. And I had a media expert, a social media expert, say to me, let's start a Facebook page, Neil Ratner Roc Doc. And you post about your experiences and tie into something. And I got involved in a This Day in Rock kind of thing. And what it's led to is I now have a weekly radio show on the local station up here, WDST, Radio Woodstock, 3 o'clock on Saturday. I do a little This Week in Rock. And so, you know, we may expand that. I don't know. You know, I do some videos and I do these reports. So, you know, maybe I'll become a media personality of some sort where I can give some good information and some good life lessons, and we'll see where it all takes us.
Well, I mean, it's fascinating for sure. I mean, your story, talking to you now, and what more that can come from you is something all around fantastic.
Well, I appreciate that, man. Thank you very much.
Now, people want to follow up. They want to know more about you. They want to order the book. Where do they go? What do they do?
Yeah, if you go to my website, Neil, NeilRatnerRocdoc.com, you can buy the book off the website, and I will be more than happy to autograph it any way you like. If you're into digital reading, Kindles, things like that, paperbacks are available on Amazon, including an audiobook, which I did myself. Lots of dialogue, lots of bad accents, but it's a kick if you like that kind of thing. And hopefully in bookstores near you soon. Working on that.
Perfect. Once it hits stores, you're going to do a tour?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Some kind of tour. We're talking about all kinds of things, but yes, I will be at a venue near you sometime in the near to distant future.
Awesome, man. I'm looking forward to seeing you once it comes around.
Well, I appreciate that, man. I really do.
Well, I appreciate talking with you. It's been fascinating. Your book is amazing, and I can't wait to see what comes from here. Hopefully.
Well, Nancy, thanks for the time. I really appreciate it. And, to everybody out there, keep on rocking, Don't give up. Believe in yourself.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Ramsey.
Take care.
Bye.